The alien fleet arrived without warning, their ships gliding silently through the blackness of space like glowing blades cutting through velvet. They were massive, their surfaces shimmering with colors that seemed to shift and dance, as if alive. On Earth, people looked up at the night sky, their faces pale with fear and awe. News channels around the globe broadcast live footage of the ships, their reporters struggling to keep their voices steady. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, but no one expected the answer to come like this: sudden, overwhelming, and terrifying. In New York City, Alex Carter sat in his small apartment, staring at the television screen. A young astrophysicist with messy brown hair and glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Alex had spent years studying the stars, searching for signs of life beyond Earth. But now, as he watched the alien ships hover over major cities, he felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. Scrolling through messages from friends and colleagues, everyone was asking the same question: what do they want? The aliens didn't leave humanity guessing for long. A message blared across every frequency, translated automatically by Earth's communication systems. "We are the Veil," the voice said, cold and emotionless. "Your planet is now under our control. Resist, and you will be destroyed." The words sent chills down Alex's spine. He turned off the TV, unable to watch anymore, and stared out his window at the city below. People were already flooding into the streets, some crying, others shouting, and a few praying. It felt like the end of the world. But not everyone was panicking. Far away from Earth, hidden in the shadow of Jupiter, Commander Laura Hayes stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the same broadcast. She was a tall woman with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, her uniform crisp despite the tension in the air. Around her, the crew worked quietly, their movements precise and focused. They had known this day might come. For decades, humanity had been preparing in secret, building a fleet of advanced warships designed to defend Earth against exactly this kind of threat. Laura glanced at the holographic display floating above the command table. It showed the positions of the alien ships, their trajectories, and estimated firepower. The numbers were daunting, but she refused to let fear take hold. Instead, she felt a flicker of hope. The aliens thought they had won before the fight even began. They had no idea what awaited them. Commander called Lieutenant Jake Monroe, her second in command. He was a wiry man with short-cropped hair and a determined expression. "Their shields are active, but we've analyzed their energy signatures. If Sophie's calculations are correct, we can bypass them." Laura nodded. Sophie Meyer, the engineering genius behind much of the fleet's technology, was hunched over a console nearby, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She had been working non-stop since the aliens appeared, running simulations and tweaking algorithms. Her work was critical. If anyone could find a weakness in the alien defenses, it was her. "We need more time," Sophie muttered, her voice tight with concentration. "If we rush this, we risk blowing our cover." Laura understood the stakes. The fleet's advantage lay in its secrecy. If the aliens discovered their presence near Jupiter, everything would fall apart. But time was a luxury they didn't have. The Veil were already deploying drones to Earth's surface, broadcasting orders for surrender. Every second counted. As Laura weighed her options, she thought about the billions of lives depending on her decision. Back on Earth, people were scared and helpless, looking to their leaders for answers. But the real battle wouldn't be fought on the ground. It would happen here, in the cold emptiness of space. And when it did, Laura knew there could be no room for hesitation. The aliens had made one fatal mistake. They celebrated too soon. Hidden in the darkness, Earth's secret fleet waited, ready to strike. Years before the arrival of the Veil, humanity had stumbled upon a discovery that changed everything. It started with a faint signal intercepted by a radio telescope in the deserts of New Mexico. At first, scientists thought it was just random noise, a glitch in the equipment. But as they analyzed the data, patterns began to emerge, patterns too complex to be natural. The message was fragmented and difficult to decode, but one thing became clear: it wasn't from Earth. The revelation sent shockwaves through governments around the world. Leaders convened in secret, realizing that if intelligent life existed beyond their planet, humanity needed to prepare. The question wasn't whether aliens would find them, it was when. And so, Project Eclipse was born. Under the leadership of two key figures, Daniel Foster, a brilliant but reclusive scientist, and Colonel Ryan Blake, a no-nonsense military strategist. Nations set aside their differences to pool resources and build something extraordinary. Hidden behind Jupiter's massive shadow, shipyards were constructed in absolute secrecy. Engineers worked tirelessly, designing vessels unlike anything humanity had ever built. These ships were sleek and deadly, equipped with weapon systems based on cutting-edge technology developed by Sophie Meyer, a young prodigy who had revolutionized energy manipulation. Her breakthroughs allowed the fleet to remain cloaked, invisible even to advanced sensors. For years, workers lived and labored in isolated stations near Jupiter, sworn to secrecy under penalty of imprisonment, or worse. Back on Earth, few people knew about Project Eclipse. Those who did were carefully vetted and monitored. Among them was Alex Carter, who had been recruited early in his career after publishing groundbreaking research on exoplanets. He remembered the day Daniel Foster approached him at a conference, offering him a chance to work on something bigger than yourself. At the time, Alex thought it was just hyperbole. Now, watching the alien ships loom over Earth, he understood how literal those words had been. Meanwhile, Laura Hayes had risen through the ranks to become commander of the fleet. A former fighter pilot with nerves of steel, she had spent years training her crew for this exact scenario. Every drill, every simulation, every sleepless night had led to this moment. As she paced the bridge of her flagship, she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride and responsibility. Humanity's survival rested on their shoulders. But preparation alone wasn't enough. Intelligence was critical. That's where Sarah Bennett came in. Once a hacker operating in the shadows of the internet, Sarah had been arrested during a crackdown on cybercrime. Instead of prison, she was offered a deal: use her skills to help protect Earth, or face life behind bars. She chose the former, and her expertise proved invaluable. Over the years, she had pieced together fragments of alien communication, searching for clues about their intentions and capabilities. Though progress was slow, each new discovery brought them closer to understanding their potential enemy. As the Veil broadcast their message of conquest, Laura reflected on the sacrifices made to get here. Billions of dollars, countless hours, and untold risks, all gambled on the hope that humanity wouldn't face this threat unprepared. Yet despite all their efforts, doubt lingered in her mind. Were they truly ready, or had they merely delayed the inevitable? On Earth, panic spread like wildfire. People scrambled to stock up on supplies, while others barricaded themselves in their homes, praying for salvation. In Chicago, journalist Emily Dawson documented the chaos, capturing images of families huddled together and soldiers patrolling the streets. She wondered if anyone truly believed they could win against such overwhelming odds. Then again, humanity had always been resilient, finding ways to survive against impossible odds. Far from Earth, hidden among the moons of Jupiter, the fleet remained silent, its ships dark and undetectable. The aliens assumed they had caught humanity off guard, unaware of the storm gathering in the shadows. They celebrated their victory prematurely, confident in their superiority. What they didn't know was that Earth wasn't defenseless. Its secret weapon, the culmination of decades of effort and sacrifice, was waiting patiently, biding its time until the perfect moment to strike. The Veil wasted no time asserting their dominance. Within hours of their arrival, alien drones descended upon major cities, their sleek, insect-like designs casting long shadows over panicked crowds. The machines hovered silently at first, scanning the streets below with glowing red sensors. Then came the broadcasts, loud, monotone voices echoing through speakers mounted on the drones. "Submit to the veil," the voice repeated. "Resistance is futile." In Chicago, Emily Dawson stood on a rooftop, her camera trained on the chaos unfolding below. She had been documenting the invasion since it began, capturing images of frightened families and abandoned storefronts. Now she watched as people scattered in all directions, some screaming, others frozen in place. A child clung to his mother's leg, tears streaming down his face. Emily lowered her camera for a moment, her hands trembling. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was real, and it was happening right in front of her. Back at the hidden command station near Jupiter, tension crackled through the air. Laura Hayes stared at the live feed from Earth, her jaw tightening as she watched the drones spread fear across the planet. The Veil were methodical, almost clinical in their approach. They didn't seem interested in negotiation or communication beyond their cold declarations of conquest. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. "We can't wait any longer," Jake Monroe said, breaking the silence on the bridge. His voice was firm but tinged with urgency. "If we don't act now, they'll start dismantling our defenses on the ground. We lose that advantage, and we're finished." Laura turned to him, her expression unreadable. She knew he was right. The situation on Earth was deteriorating rapidly, but rushing into battle without a clear plan could be just as disastrous. The fleet's strength lay in its secrecy. If the Veil discovered their position near Jupiter, everything they had worked for would crumble. Sophie Meyer, hunched over her console, spoke up without looking up. "I've isolated a potential frequency mismatch in their shield systems," she said, her tone clipped. "It's not much, but if we target it precisely, we might be able to weaken them enough for a direct hit." Laura nodded slowly. "How long until you're sure?" "A few more hours," Sophie replied. "Maybe less." Jake shook his head. "We don't have hours. Look at what's happening down there." He gestured toward the screen showing footage of burning buildings and fleeing civilians. "Every minute we delay, more people die." Laura understood the weight of his words, but she also knew that acting recklessly could doom them all. She glanced at Lieutenant Megan Klein, who stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Megan was one of the fleet's top tactical officers, known for her calm under pressure. If anyone could help make sense of this mess, it was her. "What do you think?" Laura asked. Megan hesitated before answering. "I agree with Jake. We can't afford to wait too long. But we need to send scouts first. Gather intel on their formations, weak points, anything that gives us an edge. Blind strikes won't cut it against something this advanced." Laura considered the suggestion. Sending reconnaissance teams would be risky, but it might buy them the information they needed to strike effectively. After a moment, she made her decision. "All right," she said firmly. "Prep 2 scout ships. Make it quick, and keep them cloaked. I want eyes on those bastards before we commit." As orders were relayed across the fleet, Alex Carter sat in his quarters, staring at a tablet displaying schematics of the alien ships. He had volunteered to assist Sophie with analyzing the data, but his mind kept drifting back to Earth. He thought about his younger sister still living in Boston. Was she safe? Had the drones reached her city yet? Guilt gnawed at him, knowing he was so far away, while billions faced the terror alone. Hours later, the scout ships launched, slipping silently out of the fleet's hiding spot near Jupiter. Piloted by seasoned officers, they moved cautiously, avoiding detection as they approached the outer edges of the Veil formation. Onboard cameras transmitted grainy footage back to the command station, revealing intricate details of the alien vessels. Their surfaces pulsed faintly with energy, and strange symbols glowed along their hulls. One of the pilots, Captain Chris Evans, whispered into his comms. "They're huge," he said, his voice barely audible. "Bigger than we thought." Laura leaned closer to the monitor, studying the images. Despite the fear gripping her heart, a flicker of determination ignited within her. The Veil may have celebrated too soon, But humanity wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The scout ships returned with critical information, their pilots shaken but alive. Captain Chris Evans debriefed Commander Laura Hayes in the dimly lit war room, his face pale and his hands gripping the edge of the table. The images and data they brought back painted a clearer picture of the Veil fleet. Massive, intimidating, and bristling with weapons. But there were cracks in their armor, both literal and metaphorical. Sophie Meyer pored over the footage, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she analyzed every detail. "They're not invincible," Sophie said finally, breaking the tense silence. She pointed to a section of the screen where faint fluctuations in the alien shields were visible. Their energy fields pulse rhythmically, like a heartbeat. If we time our attacks right, we can exploit those gaps. Laura nodded, her mind racing. This was the opening they needed, but exploiting it would require precision and courage. She turned to Jake Monroe, who had been pacing the room, his brow furrowed. "We need a plan," she said firmly. "Something bold enough to catch them off guard, but smart enough to give us the edge." Jake stopped mid-step and looked at her. "What about Shadow Strike?" he asked. It was a contingency plan they'd discussed during training exercises, a high-risk maneuver designed to hit the enemy where it hurt most. Their command center. The idea was simple yet dangerous. A small strike team would use Jupiter's magnetic field as cover to approach the Veil mothership undetected. Once close enough, they'd deploy Sophie's frequency disruptor to disable the shields and deliver a crippling blow. Laura considered it carefully. Shadow Strike had always been seen as a last resort because of its risks. Pilots would have to navigate through dense asteroid fields and avoid detection by enemy sensors. One wrong move, and the entire fleet could be exposed. But desperate times called for desperate measures. "All right," Laura said after a long pause. "We'll do it. Prep the strike team and arm the disruptor. Sophie, I want you to oversee the final calibrations personally. We only get one shot at this." Sophie nodded, already heading back to her station. Her mind was a whirlwind of equations and variables, but she pushed aside her nerves. Failure wasn't an option, not when billions of lives depended on her work. Meanwhile, Alex Carter joined the briefing session, clutching a tablet filled with notes. He had spent hours analyzing the symbols glowing on the Veil ships, trying to decipher their meaning. Though he hadn't cracked the code entirely, he noticed something peculiar. "These patterns," he said, pointing to the screen, "they repeat, almost like instructions or commands." Laura frowned. "You think they're controlling the drones?" "It's possible," Alex replied. "If we can disrupt their signal, maybe we can neutralize some of their ground forces." Laura exchanged a glance with Megan Klein, who stood nearby. "That could buy us more time," Megan said thoughtfully. "But someone will need to tap into their network without getting caught." "I'll do it," Sarah Bennett volunteered, stepping forward. Her voice was steady despite the enormity of the task. As the fleet's top hacker, she was the best person for the job. "If I can piggyback onto their comms, I might be able to jam their signals, or even turn their own systems against them." Laura hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Do it, but stay sharp. If they detect you, it's over." As preparations intensified, tension rippled through the fleet. Pilots double-checked their ships, engineers fine-tuned weapons systems, and officers reviewed strategies late into the night. Everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a battle, it was humanity's last stand. Back on Earth, Emily Dawson continued documenting the invasion, though her movements were slower now, weighed down by exhaustion and fear. She watched as alien drones patrolled the skies, their red eyes scanning the streets below. People huddled indoors, too terrified to venture outside. Yet amidst the despair, there were whispers of hope. Rumors spread of a hidden fleet near Jupiter, waiting to strike back. Some dismissed it as wishful thinking, but others clung to it like a lifeline. Far from Earth, Laura stood on the bridge of her flagship, staring out at the endless expanse of space. The weight of command pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she refused to let doubt take hold. The Veil thought they had won, celebrating their assumed victory, while humanity prepared to fight back. They had no idea what was coming. And that gave Laura a glimmer of hope. Shadow Strike launches in 6 hours, Jake announced, snapping her out of her thoughts. She took a deep breath and straightened her posture. "Make sure everyone's ready," she said quietly. "This is it." The hours leading up to Shadow Strike passed in a blur of activity. The strike team gathered on the flight deck, their faces grim but resolute. Each pilot had been handpicked for this mission, their skills unmatched and their courage unwavering. Among them was Lieutenant Jake Monroe, who volunteered to lead the charge despite knowing the odds were stacked against them. He climbed into his fighter, running through pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. His hands moved quickly over the controls, but his mind lingered on the task ahead. This wasn't just another mission. It was humanity's last chance. Commander Laura Hayes watched from the observation deck as the ships prepared for launch. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the weight of responsibility she carried. She knew not everyone would return, but there was no other choice. If they failed, Earth would fall. As the final countdown began, she gave the order that sent shivers down her spine. "Launch Shadow Strike." The strike team roared out of the fleet's hiding spot near Jupiter, their ships cloaked and silent. Guided by precise calculations and aided by the planet's magnetic field, they navigated through treacherous asteroid fields, dodging debris, and staying hidden from enemy sensors. Tension crackled in the comms as pilots whispered updates to one another, their voices tight with focus. Every second felt like an eternity. Back at the command station, Sophie Meyer hovered anxiously over her console, monitoring the frequency disruptor mounted on Jake's ship. It was her creation, her lifeline, and the key to disabling the Veil shields. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the settings, ensuring it was calibrated perfectly. "You've got this," Sarah Bennett said softly, placing a reassuring hand on Sophie's shoulder. Sarah herself was deep in the alien network, working tirelessly to disrupt their drone signals. Progress was slow, but she could feel the system weakening under her intrusion. Meanwhile, Alex Carter sat in the war room, glued to the live feed from the strike team's cameras. The Veil mothership loomed larger with every passing moment, its surface alive with pulsating energy. Alien fighters patrolled the perimeter, their movements sharp and mechanical. Alex held his breath as Jake's ship slipped past them, undetected. "Almost there," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Suddenly, alarms blared across the Veil fleet. One of their patrol ships had detected faint energy traces, a sign that something was amiss. Panic rippled through the strike team as enemy fighters turned toward their position. "We're compromised," Jake shouted into the comms. "Activate the disruptor." Sophie's voice came through loud and clear. "Frequency aligned. Disruptor online. Now." With a deafening pulse, the disruptor fired, sending waves of targeted energy crashing into the Veil shields. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, with a spectacular burst of light, the shields flickered and collapsed. Cheers erupted back at the command station, but there was no time to celebrate. The strike team surged forward, unleashing everything they had on the exposed mothership. Explosions lit up the void as human fighters swarmed the massive vessel. Jake's ship darted between enemy fire, his focus razor-sharp. "Hit the engines," he ordered. "Take out their mobility." Missiles streaked through space, slamming into the mothership's hull. Fires erupted along its surface, illuminating the darkness. But the Veil weren't done yet. Reinforcements poured in, forcing the strike team to split up and regroup. Jake's ship took heavy damage, sparks flying inside the cockpit as systems began to fail. "I'm hit," he yelled, struggling to maintain control. "Break off, Jake," Laura commanded, her voice strained. "Fall back to extraction point." But Jake shook his head, gritting his teeth. "Negative. I can still do this." With a final surge of determination, he piloted his battered ship straight into the heart of the chaos, deploying a payload of explosives directly into the mothership's core. The resulting detonation was catastrophic, tearing the vessel apart in a blinding explosion. As the shockwave rippled outward, the remaining Veil forces faltered, their coordination shattered. On the command station, cheers erupted once again, but Laura remained silent. Her eyes scanned the battlefield, searching for any sign of Jake's ship. Static filled the comms where his voice had been moments before. Far from the fight, Emily Dawson stood on her rooftop in Chicago, watching as the skies above seemed to shimmer with distant explosions. She didn't know what was happening, but for the first time since the invasion began, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humanity wasn't going to lose after all. The explosion of the Veil mothership sent shockwaves rippling through space, a fiery spectacle that lit up the darkness like a second sun. Debris from the massive vessel spiraled outward, colliding with smaller alien ships and sending them tumbling into chaos. The strike team fought valiantly to regroup, their fighters weaving between the wreckage as enemy forces scrambled to recover. But for all its destruction, the battle was far from over. Back at the command station near Jupiter, Laura Hayes gripped the railing of the observation deck, her knuckles white. Her eyes darted across the live feed, searching desperately for any sign of Jake Monroe's ship. Static filled the comms where his voice had been just moments before. "Jake, report." She called, her voice sharp but tinged with fear. There was no response. Sophie Meyer sat at her console, her face pale as she monitored the remaining enemy ships. The Veil were reeling from the loss of their mothership, but they weren't defeated yet. Reinforcements were already moving in, their formations tight and aggressive. "We've got incoming," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. "They're heading straight for the fleet." Laura clenched her jaw. If the Veil discovered their position, everything would be lost. "Activate emergency protocols," she ordered. "Divert power to the cloaking systems. We can't let them find us." As the crew scrambled to execute her commands, Alex Carter stood nearby, clutching a tablet filled with data from the battle. He had been analyzing the aftereffects of the disruptor pulse and noticed something alarming. "Commander," he said urgently, "the pulse didn't just disable their shields, it destabilized their energy cores. If we hit them again with another frequency burst, we might be able to trigger chain reactions across their fleet." Laura turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Can we do it without exposing ourselves?" Alex hesitated. "It's risky. We'd need to get close enough to recalibrate the disruptor in real time, and someone would have to go in alone." Before Laura could respond, Lieutenant Megan Klein stepped forward. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "My ship's faster, and I know how to handle myself out there." Laura studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Make it quick, and don't let them see you coming." Megan saluted and hurried to the flight deck, climbing into her fighter with practiced ease. Within minutes, she launched into the fray, her ship blending seamlessly into the chaos of the battlefield. She navigated carefully, avoiding detection as she closed in on one of the larger alien cruisers. Alien fighters swarmed around her, their weapons firing blindly in the confusion. Megan's hands moved deftly over the controls, dodging blasts and returning fire when necessary. Meanwhile, Jake Monroe drifted helplessly in the wreckage of his destroyed fighter. His ship had taken critical damage during the final assault, leaving him stranded in the void. The cockpit was dark, life support systems flickering weakly. Pain radiated through his body, but he forced himself to stay conscious. Through the cracked glass of his canopy, he could see flashes of light as the battle raged on. He knew he couldn't give up. Not now. Using what little power remained, Jake activated his distress beacon. It was a faint signal, barely strong enough to reach the fleet. But it was all he had. Back at the command station, Sarah Bennett picked up the transmission almost immediately. "I've got him," she said, her voice breaking with relief. "He's alive." Laura exhaled sharply, her shoulders sagging with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "Send a recovery team." Now. As Megan reached her target, she deployed the recalibrated disruptor, aiming carefully at the cruiser's exposed core. The device hummed softly before releasing another pulse, this one even more powerful than the first. The alien ship shuddered violently, its engines erupting in flames before it broke apart entirely. The explosion triggered a chain reaction, spreading to nearby vessels and sending the Veil fleet into disarray. On Earth, Emily Dawson watched as the skies above Chicago seemed to shift, the drones retreating unexpectedly. People emerged cautiously from their homes, looking up in awe and disbelief. For the first time since the invasion began, there was hope and silence. Far from Earth, Laura stared at the screen, watching the remnants of the Veil forces retreat. Victory wasn't complete, but humanity had struck a devastating blow. As the fleet prepared to regroup, she allowed herself a brief moment of quiet reflection. They had won this round, but the war was far from over. Jake Monroe's fighter drifted silently in the void, its systems failing one by one. The cold of space seeped into the cockpit, and his breath fogged the cracked glass of his canopy. Pain throbbed through his body, but he forced himself to stay awake, knowing that falling unconscious here would mean death. His distress beacon pulsed faintly, a small but crucial lifeline to the fleet. He clung to the hope that someone would find him before it was too late. Back at the command station near Jupiter, Sarah Bennett worked tirelessly to pinpoint Jake's exact location. Her fingers flew across her keyboard as she triangulated the weak signal from his beacon. "Got it," she said finally, her voice tight with urgency. "He's about 20 clicks from the wreckage of the mothership." Laura Hayes wasted no time. "Prep a rescue shuttle," she ordered, "and send a fighter escort, just in case the Veil come back for round 2. She couldn't afford to lose anyone else today, especially not someone as vital as Jake. The recovery team launched quickly, their ships weaving carefully through the debris field left behind by the battle. Pilots scanned the area, searching for any sign of movement. It wasn't long before they spotted Jake's damaged fighter, floating like a ghost among the wreckage. The shuttle moved in slowly, extending its docking arm to latch onto the crippled ship. Inside, medics prepared to stabilize Jake as soon as they brought him aboard. While the rescue mission unfolded, Lieutenant Megan Klein returned to the fleet, her fighter battered but intact. She climbed out onto the flight deck, where Sophie Meyer was waiting anxiously. "You did it," Sophie said, relief washing over her face. "That pulse took out half their fleet." Megan nodded, though her expression remained somber. "It wasn't enough to finish them off. They'll regroup, and next time, they won't underestimate us." Laura joined them moments later, her gaze fixed on the live feed showing the retreating Veil forces. "They're damaged, but not destroyed," she said grimly. "We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to prepare for another attack." Meanwhile, on Earth, Emily Dawson continued documenting the aftermath of the battle. In Chicago, people gathered in the streets, their faces a mix of fear and cautious optimism. Alien drones had withdrawn unexpectedly, leaving cities eerily quiet. Emergency broadcasts urged citizens to remain calm and stay indoors, but curiosity drew many outside. Some lit candles or held makeshift vigils, praying for the safety of those who had fought for them in the shadows. Amid the chaos, Alex Carter received an urgent message from Commander Laura Hayes. "We need you to analyze the data from Megan's disruptor pulse," she said over the comms. "Find out why it caused such widespread damage, and if we can replicate it." Alex nodded, even though she couldn't see him. He retreated to his workstation, pulling up the telemetry logs from the battle. As he sifted through the information, patterns began to emerge. The frequency pulse hadn't just disabled the Veil ships. It had destabilized their energy cores, causing catastrophic failures. But there was something else, something strange. Buried deep within the data were traces of alien code, fragments of commands that seemed biological. Could their ships be alive? Alex muttered to himself, his brow furrowed in thought. If the Veil vessels weren't purely mechanical, it could explain their resilience and offer new vulnerabilities to exploit. Hours later, The rescue team returned with Jake Monroe safely aboard. Medics rushed him to the infirmary, where he was treated for injuries sustained during the battle. Despite his weakened state, Jake insisted on speaking with Laura as soon as he regained consciousness. "The cruiser I hit," he rasped, his voice hoarse. There was something inside. Not just tech, something organic. Laura frowned, leaning closer. "What do you mean?" "I saw it right before my ship went down," Jake explained. "Their ships aren't machines. They are connected to them somehow, like they're part of the crew." This revelation sent ripples through the command staff. If the Veil ships were living organisms, it changed everything about how humanity approached the fight. Laura immediately ordered Alex to prioritize analyzing this new piece of information. Every detail mattered now. Every clue could tip the scales in their favor. Far beyond Jupiter, the remnants of the Veil fleet regrouped, their leaders furious at the unexpected resistance. They had underestimated humanity once, but they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Back on the fleet's bridge, Laura stared out at the stars, her mind racing with possibilities. Humanity had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. And when the Veil returned, Earth would need to be ready. The days following the battle were a blur of activity for the fleet near Jupiter. Repairs were underway, with engineers working around the clock to patch up damaged ships and recalibrate weapon systems. Despite the victory, the mood aboard the command station was far from celebratory. Everyone knew the Veil would return. And next time, they wouldn't hold back. Alex Carter spent most of his time in the lab, poring over the data Jake had provided about the alien cruisers. The more he analyzed it, the clearer it became that the Veil ships weren't just machines, they were alive. The energy signatures matched patterns seen in organic life forms, and the strange symbols Alex had been studying seemed to act as both commands and neural pathways. "It's like their ships are extensions of themselves," he explained to Laura during one of their briefings. "They don't pilot them, they are connected to them." Laura frowned, processing this revelation. If the Veil ships were living beings, traditional tactics might not work against them. Destroying their vessels wouldn't just disable their forces. It could be seen as an act of genocide, something that might escalate the conflict even further. But humanity couldn't afford to hesitate, not when billions of lives depended on their actions. Sophie Meyer joined the discussion, her voice calm but firm. "If we can target the connection between the Veil and their ships, we might be able to sever it. That way, we disable their vessels without outright destroying them." "That's easier said than done," Sarah Bennett chimed in, leaning against the wall. She had finished disrupting the alien drone network earlier that day, but her face showed signs of exhaustion. "Their systems are incredibly complex. Even with my skills, breaking into their core programming won't be easy." Laura nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. "We'll need every advantage we can get. Sophie, keep refining the disruptor pulse. Alex, focus on finding weak points in their connections. And Sarah, see if you can tap into their communication channels again. We need to know what they're planning." As orders were relayed across the fleet, morale began to improve slightly. News of the successful strike spread among the crew, boosting confidence. Lieutenant Megan Klein walked the flight deck, checking in with pilots and offering words of encouragement. "We hit them hard," she told one group gathered near a fighter ship. "But we got to stay sharp. They'll come back stronger." Jake Monroe, still recovering in the infirmary, insisted on joining strategy meetings despite his injuries. His experience firsthand with the alien cruiser gave him unique insight into their operations. "They're arrogant," he said during one session. "Even after the battle, they think they're superior. We use that against them." Back on Earth, Emily Dawson published her first report on the battle, detailing the bravery of those who had fought in secret. Her article sparked hope around the globe, though governments remained tight-lipped about the existence of the hidden fleet. People began referring to the mysterious defenders as Earth's guardians, painting murals and lighting candles in gratitude. It was a small comfort amid the lingering fear of another attack. Days turned into weeks, and the fleet prepared for the inevitable rematch. Training intensified, with simulations designed to mimic the Veil's unpredictable tactics. Pilots practiced evasive maneuvers while engineers tested new modifications to the ships. Every member of the crew understood the stakes. Failure wasn't an option. Then came the moment they had all been dreading. Long-range sensors picked up movement beyond Saturn, an entire armada of Veil ships heading straight for Earth. Their speed and formation suggested they meant business this time. Laura called an emergency meeting, her expression grim but resolute. "They're coming," she said simply, addressing her officers. "And they're bringing everything they've got." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. This was it, the final showdown. Humanity had struck a blow before, but now they faced annihilation or survival. Laura looked at each of her team members, seeing determination in their eyes. They had prepared for this day, trained for it, sacrificed for it. "Let's finish what we started," she said finally, her voice steady. "For Earth." As the fleet mobilized once more, the Veil approached with cold precision, unaware that humanity was no longer the frightened species they had underestimated. Hidden near Jupiter, Earth's secret fleet waited patiently, ready to strike again.